Welcome to More Than a Muse podcast. My name is Sadie.
I'm Stani, and happy Monday. We're back here again for another Halloween episode talking all about witches. And we've got firsthand experience because Sadie was in Salem.
Wow. Just got back this weekend. We did a Boston, New England trip and spent a day in Salem, which was very timely considering what we're talking about this month. In March, we did a whole episode on the Salem witch trials. There's so much, and I wish I could remember everything that we talked about. I wish I had a perfect encyclopedia, because walking around Salem, it was super interesting. It was so cool. First off, my personal recommendation is to visit Salem in October during Halloween, because the whole city had the Halloween decorations up and very much embraces the witch theme, like their cute little downtown area. It was very busy, but it was super fun and very festive. We did the Salem Witch Museum. I don't even know really if you can call it a museum, but part of it's like this interactive thing, it's like this room thing where they tell the story of the Salem witch trials with not actors. For some reason, I thought it was actors that would be doing it. It's like mannequins, which it sounds weird.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things that been there a long time, so it's a little campy and kitschy, but I had a good time, and it was actually very informative. I feel like they got a lot of stuff right. And they talk about at the beginning of it that the reason for doing it is to keep the names of the people who are falsely accused alive and to tell their story. And then afterwards, they talk about how there's modern day witch hunts. We went to the Salem Witch Trial Memorial, which had the names of all of the people who were killed in that year of 1692 because of the Salem witch trials. And they have specifically their names, what happened. And it was really cool because people were placing flowers and different trinkets and things on the memorial of all of the people that were killed all the way back in 1692. So it was a really cool thing. And yeah, just to be able to see it all and talk about it. And it's a beautiful town, right by the water. We took the ferry in from Boston.
Oh, I love that.
Had never been to Boston before, and now I'm wow, is it the best city in America? Probably. I feel like anyone that I know who's from Boston has so much pride in where they're from, and now I'm I get it. As is your right. You should brag about that place all you want. But no, it was really cool. I wanted to bring up the fact because I don't know how much you've been online this last week with the talks of Taylor Swift and some of the things that people have been talking about, the different potential dog whistles that are happening with her merch. Have you seen this at all?
A little bit. I don't think nearly as much, probably.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have separated myself. I had to take a social media break because it was affecting me. My point in bringing that up is during the Salem Witch Trial Museum, they talk about different instances in history where kind of this witch hunt craze happened. They brought up the Red Scare with finding communists. They even brought up the AIDS crisis. And how that kind of created a witch hunt. And the point that they talked about is that usually what happens is in the time, in that community, there is some type of fear, something they're afraid of. And that's something they talked about a lot. You could walk around the streets, you could hear walking tour guides talking about this, where the people of Salem at that time were under a lot of stress, a lot of fear. And then there was that trigger of these girls, how we know the story of the Salem witch trials, the girls start acting out, speaking in tongues and under spells, and they blame, and then the blame starts happening.
Yeah.
And that's the trigger for it. And then the craze happens. And they brought up different times in history. You can follow that pattern where people fall into that Salem witch craze. And the point is that it's easy to look back at the Salem witch trials and say, they're so crazy, they weren't using logic, and remove yourself from it and say, if I were there, then I would have been logical. I would have known that they weren't witches. And then at the same time, I was seeing what was happening online, and I saw a comment on a video talking about Taylor Swift. And I'm going to just very briefly summarize it here, which is basically that Taylor Swift released a necklace for her song Opalite, where the line is we were dancing through the lightning strikes. So the necklace features lightnings, and people were making connections to it potentially being a Nazi SS symbol, and that she was dog whistling. And I don't know if dog whistling is the verb, but that's what it was a signage for. I saw a comment referencing this kind of sudden attack of being this reminds me of the Salem witch trials. And I felt that was a pretty apt analysis of what was happening, where First off, if anyone did see that necklace and does feel like, I don't know a lot about that symbol, I wouldn't have known that lightning strikes have that history. But I do feel pretty confident in saying that I don't think that Taylor Swift is doing that. And
she endorsed Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot you could criticize things about Taylor Swift, but I think there is a long history of her supporting and donating to candidates that I think that we can safely assume that she still does align with them. I haven't seen enough behavior, any really behavior that would justify otherwise. So to use a necklace as like the dog whistle of a merch thing that like usually only her fans would pay attention to, I don't think that is the same thing. I also saw Hank Green make a video about this last night that I thought was really interesting. So I'd recommend going to his account because he's not going to summarize it.
I actually saw this.
Okay. It was an incredible video where he just brought up the fact of like, pretty much his point was like, Taylor Swift's on your side. Why would you push her out of your side? I feel like that was his main point of it's like, we're supposed to unite, and using these kind of things like actually isn't beneficial. And the phrase that he used is if your version of activism is scrolling until something makes you angry, that's not activism. And I thought that was such an incredible point and a great thing to say. And again, I liken that to the Salem witch trials of you can't say, oh, I wouldn't have done that then if now your current version of activism is to look for clues that other people are doing wrong and then loudly broadcast all of the things they're potentially doing wrong, when the arguments for it was the fact that there were 8 lightning bolts in the photo, if you count them, but then actually there weren't 8, there were 12. And even then I saw people justifying, but no, it's how they were appearing and how they were marketing it that matters. And unfortunately, I just don't think that is grounded in reality. And I think that's a good thing. Like, we don't have to do that. And there's so much actual work that can be done that isn't scrolling on your phone and trying to find the moral fault and how other people are messing up and then blasting them on social media for your own, for one thing, profit, let's be honest, because if a video does well on social media, then congratulations. You're making money. Controversy sparks money on social media. And I don't know, I thought it was a very interesting thing and a good reminder that we're not above history. Like, we're all humans. And if in the past we were able to fall into that Salem witch, whatever happened there, like, we're still susceptible to that kind of behavior, which it makes sense. Like, we're in very scary, trying times. You want to find something to almost like you can control and that feels manageable to attack. And maybe it's easy to point it to a pop star where, I don't know, I don't want to say there's no consequence there, because of course, like, she's a very powerful woman, but it's like different than your world leaders who are actually like making the laws. Anyways, I don't think I'm making any hot takes here.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it's been happening with a lot of things, even with Sabrina, them like her album cover and stuff. I still think back on that. And turning that whole thing into something that I don't think she was intending for it to be at all, and like didn't need to be interpreted that way. It's interesting that kind of continues to be a thing where I think you're right. People are just trying to find something to attack that feels more manageable because the world isn't such upheaval. But you're like arguably taking people who are on your side and like villainizing them, which isn't helpful at all.
No, it's really not. And I think that it does in the end do way more damage. And like, sure, if you want to have nuanced conversations about wealthy people in America, like the elite people in America, like Taylor Swift, like these other pop stars who are making a lot of money and who are making art and therefore are in a way reflective of our culture, like, of course we can criticize the art. Of course we can look at it through different lenses, but I think it takes another step when then, I don't know, counting the chain links between the lightning bolts, that's a very universal symbol in some instances, like that. And then also, like you said, with the Sabrina Carpenter cover, like, you can have your thoughts on it, sure, but then to say, and therefore, like, Sabrina Carpenter is a stain to the feminist. Like, I don't know. I just
setting the feminist movement back however many years or whatever. And I was
Yeah, like I
no.
don't think Sabrina Carpenter is the one doing it. I think there's other things happening that could be doing it. And sure, like we all exist in blah blah blah. I could put all the caveats in the world, but like at the end of the day, I do think it was a good reminder for me that I'm like, the world is so integrated with social media, but like that isn't the real world actually. Like that's not real. Like the world exists outside of my phone, and people yelling about things on there exist outside of everything else. So then therefore, what can we actually do that's like real and tangible and not yelling at things with our phone or commenting things on our phone? And like
Yeah.
online activism sure is great and has had a place, but is it the most effective? What is it? I don't know.
Yeah. Probably not attacking random merch items. I don't think
That's the
that's
thing is I'm like, there's helpful things, there's great things you
Mhm.
can do, there's a lot of ways you can educate yourself and others, but like the rage baiting and the spinning up controversy to, I don't know, point fingers, I'm like, oop, it's giving Salem circa 1692.
Yeah.
Sorry about it. So anyways, it was very timely. I was thinking about that a lot this week. I've literally set limits on my phone so that I can't be on it, because I'm like, if there's
Yeah.
one thing that I can do right now, I think is exist in the real world. That can be our own form of protest, I think, is to touch grass, as
Definitely.
people jokingly say in the
Mhm.
comments, but I think there is a great point to that.
Yeah.
Go out
No,
and touch
I
grass.
agree. And like the good news is there's like things happening out in the real
And
world that
there
you can
are
be a
things
part of. They had
exactly. Yes.
the No Kings protest this weekend. That was
I know we
huge.
walked through that during when we were
Yeah.
in Boston. It was happening in their big common park. It was very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there is ways to be a part of activism in more real world ways rather than making
Exactly.
TikTok videos about lightning bolts. But
Yes. And I think
yeah.
I would encourage everyone to go watch Hank Green's TikTok video. He said it all much better than I ever could, but
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting point, and Salem is cool. So that's
Cool.
my starting point for today. And I'm
Yeah.
excited for you to talk to us about what we're learning about.
I know. We're talking about surrealism, which is really fun. And I had no idea that this was so tied to witchcraft, but it very
Yeah.
loosely is. But I'm very excited to talk about it. So today we're talking about the 1940s with this trio of women who found themselves in the capital of Mexico. They all have tumultuous pasts and kind of this magical belief, and end up forming a close knit bond that lasts almost 20 years. And to their former homelands, they were seen as exiles. To their artistic peers, they were seen as rebels. And to the Mexican public, they became known as La Tres Brujas, or the Three Witches.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
very fun. And honestly, it's a fun way to talk about it because they didn't get burned alive or anything like that
Yay.
for being considered witches. It almost comes across as a little bit of a badge of honor in some ways, which I really enjoyed. But before we dive into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what surrealism is, just for all you people who didn't take 5 million art history classes in college that were required.
Me, thank you.
That's okay. So, the word surrealism was coined in 1917, but it was formally defined in Paris in 1924 with the Surrealist Manifesto written by Andrew Britton. And it was the whole idea of fusing together dream and waking life. Breton called it super reality by tapping the unconscious through methods like psychic automatism, dream recording, free association, and chance operations. So the word surreal means beyond real, and surrealist artists wanted to show that there's more to the world than what's visible, that our dreams, thoughts, and even random ideas can be just as real and powerful as facts. So you'll see strange combinations in surrealist art that don't usually go together, like a train coming out of a fireplace, a person with the head of a flower, melting clocks is a really famous one by Salvador Dali, the melting clocks all over the desert landscape. And these odd or dreamlike images are meant to make people think differently and start to question what's normal. It also was very heavily inspired by Sigmund Freud, who studied how our unconscious minds work. And then you've got artists like Salvador Dali, René Magritte, and Max Ernst, who use painting, writing, and photography to explore these hidden parts of the mind. And it wasn't just about weird pictures, it was about freedom, breaking away from rules and logic to show that imagination can be a way of discovering truth. But yeah, Paris was the main area for it, but then you also had London and New York, who were started to present surrealism as both art and experiment. And then World War II scattered its members, obviously, as people had to flee Europe to go everywhere else. And so then this kind of spread surrealism across the world to the Americas and beyond as people moved around. Women were part of surrealism in the early public phases. They contributed texts and images to surrealist journals, took part in sessions, and exhibited in group shows alongside men. And then, of course, as everything technically happens, when the movement is young and new and everyone's exploring, women are very much so a part of it. And then as it becomes more established and more a part of high art and everything, the women were slowly pushed out of it. So the group's leadership, editorial control, and manifesto authorship were overwhelmingly male. Leaders frequently framed women as muses or femme effete figures, which is like an adult woman who retains or projects the traits of childhood, innocence, spontaneity, playfulness, and emotional expressiveness. We talked born yesterday trope and everything. That was a very common role for women within surrealism. And then also had their roles as artists, photographers, and writers. So they were still a part of it, but because of this whole femme effete idealized version of women, they were seen as like pure vessels for the unconscious. So innocent, intuitive, unspoiled by rational thought. And it became patronizing for women because they weren't allowing her to develop in her way and keeping her trapped in this innocent vessel type role within the art movement. But obviously, the women we're talking about today were able to step out of that a little bit and become more than just these muses or femme effete figures. They became the three witches of surrealism. So incredible. A little bit more powerful. So we're going to just briefly talk about each of them. We have Leonora Carrington, who was born in England in a wealthy Roman Catholic family. She was very rebellious and independent from a very young age and was expelled from several convent schools, which I feel like has become a theme with many of the artists we cover. They are constantly getting expelled out of their convent schools.
Totally.
Before studying art at Florence and later at the Chelsea School of Art and Ozenfund Academy in London. Her father strongly opposed her becoming an artist, but her mother supported her interest and actually introduced her to surrealism through Herbert Reed's 1936 book titled Surrealism. Then she met the German surrealist Max Ernst at a party in London, and the two began a personal and professional relationship. They moved to southern France, collaborated on several works while developing their individual artistic styles. And when World War II began, Ernst was arrested by French authorities as a hostile alien, and later by the Gestapo when Germany invaded France. His imprisonment and the instability of the war deeply affected Carrington, who began to experience severe anxiety and delusions, which led to her leaving France with her friend Catherine Yarrow and going to Madrid, hoping to recover. Instead, her mental health deteriorated further, which I can't even imagine being alive at that time. I would be a basket case, so very relatable. Yeah. She developed paranoia and hallucinations, believing that she was being poisoned and pursued. And so her family actually arranged for her to be institutionalized at a sanatorium in Spain. And there she was actually subjected to shock therapy, which was hopefully intended to induce seizures. And then they also sedated her with barbiturates to try and help her recover. Somehow I don't think that shock therapy and barbiturates are going to do it for you, but
no.
I'm no doctor.
But I'm no doctor. That's so true.
But we don't do that anymore, so I don't think that's helpful. In her later memoir, Down Below, she described the experience as traumatic. I can believe that.
Yeah, that's so
recounting
valid.
Hallucinations and physical suffering during her confinement. After her release, she was placed under the supervision of a nurse and told she would be sent to a sanatorium in South Africa at her family's request. But during a stop in Lisbon, Portugal, she escaped and sought refuge at the Mexican embassy, where she found the poet and diplomat Renato Ludec, who she knew from Paris. Ludec arranged a marriage of convenience to give her diplomatic protection, allowing her to leave Europe safely. Because you have to realize at the time, she was under the control of her family until she was married, because then she could be under the control of her husband as a woman.
This
So
is a crazy story.
yeah. And this is all before we even get to the part where
That's what I
people
was going
start
to say.
calling her a witch.
We're not even to the witches part. So, wow. This is just one of them.
Yep. So she marries him, and then they are able to leave Europe safely, travel to New York, and then to Mexico City. And then, of course, she settled there permanently after they got divorced a year later. In Mexico, she became a very important figure in the local art community, forming very close relationships with other European exiles, including the Spanish painter Remedios Varo and Hungarian photographer Kati Horna, who we'll be talking about in a little bit. Her work in this period combined themes of magic, mythology, and female identity, and she produced paintings, sculptures, and writings that explored transformation, alchemy, and personal symbolism. Some of her well-known pieces from this time is Self-Portrait or The Inn of the Dawn Horse, The Lovers, and Then She Saw the Daughter of the Minotaur, which are all very haunting. There's a lot of horses involved. Very like half real, half myth is how they describe them. She also became very active in feminist and political causes. She designed a poster called Mujeres Quinceasa in 1973 for the women's liberation movement in Mexico, and often spoke about women reclaiming power and autonomy. Reflecting on her life and career, she said, "I didn't have time to be anyone's muse. I was too busy rebelling against my family and learning to be an artist."
Yes, that's amazing.
She's like, I'm too busy to be a muse.
That's a quote that could go on merch.
Yep.
I didn't have time to be a muse. I was too busy rebelling. Beautiful.
Yep. Too busy.
And making art.
She continued to paint, write, and exhibit internationally for the rest of her life until she died in 2011 at the age of 94. 94. That is a long life. And her legacy as a central figure in Surrealism and a pioneer of women's art continues to be recognized worldwide through major retrospectives, publications, and public sculptures. So a lot of her themes were transformation, animal symbolism, and psychic rebirth. And she would blend a lot of Celtic lore, alchemy, and the divine feminine together in her work, seeing painting as a ritual and imagination as freedom. And she ended up meeting Remedios Varo and Kati Horna, the two that we'll be talking about, through the Mexico artist circles, where they became inseparable. And they all had homes filled with cats, herbs, and surreal sketches.
Witches.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the next is Remedios Varo. She was born in Catalonia, Spain, to a liberal agnostic engineer father and devout Catholic mother. Her father was a hydraulic engineer, and so they traveled a lot throughout Spain and North Africa, which exposed her to a lot of varied cultures and landscapes at a very early age. She showed artistic talent very early on that was encouraged by her father, who had her copy his technical drawings and took her to museums. She attended a strict convent school, which she later described as stifling, but found escape in literature. She read Jules
So she didn't
Verne.
get expelled.
No, she just had to escape throughout books. So
you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah, so fair.
Lots of Jules Verne and Edgar Allan Poe, which you can imagine would create more of a mystical, fantastical theme of art later on in her life. And then she went to the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando in Madrid and received a traditional academic art education there before graduating and marrying fellow artist Gerardo Lizarraga. I think. She lived in Paris and Barcelona, working in advertising and becoming involved with avant-garde artists. She associated with the Surrealist community very early in Barcelona and began to develop her very own Surrealist visual language. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, however, in 1936 profoundly affected her. Her younger brother died while serving with Franco's forces, and she could not return to Spain afterwards. Afterwards, she met French Surrealist poet Benjamin Perret, who was fighting for the Republican faction, and they became partners. And in 1937, she followed him to Paris, where she joined the circle of Surrealist artists that included Andrew Breton, Max Ernst, and Leonora Carrington. Although she was never formally a part of this group, her work appeared in the Surrealist exhibitions and magazines. Life in Paris was very difficult at the time. They lived in poverty and had to forge paintings in order to survive. Apparently, forging paintings was a very, lucrative career at the time.
Like you
So,
redo the famous ones?
mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, because you probably just wasn't you couldn't make prints available.
Nope. So yeah, they would forge paintings, and the better you were art, the better of a copy you could make of these
That
masters' paintings.
is a cool. We should do an episode on the
I know,
forge
art
paintings.
forgery.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
we really should. And then World War II, of course, begins, and her situation becomes dangerous because she's a foreigner. She's the partner of a communist, and she was briefly imprisoned in 1940 by French authorities. She actually never has discussed this experience publicly, but it obviously deeply affected her. Because after her release, she fled Nazi occupied Paris and joined Perret and Marcel, where they sought the help of an emergency rescue committee that helped artists and intellectuals escape Europe. And so they were able to obtain passage to Mexico, which they had been granted asylum to Spanish refugees, which makes sense. Mexico was like,
Mm-hmm.
all of the Spanish refugees fleeing, come here and you'll be safe. And so she arrived in Mexico City later that year, joining the community of European exiles and artists, living in modest conditions and supporting herself through commercial illustration, including work for Bayer and other advertising firms. Although she painted very little in the beginning, she began to develop her mature artistic style, and after her separation from Perret, she traveled briefly to Venezuela for scientific illustration work before returning to Mexico, where she married Austrian refugee Walter Gruen. And then, with his financial and emotional support, she dedicated herself fully to painting. Her best known works are creation of the birds, the call, and exploration of the sources of the Orinoco River. She had her first solo exhibition at the Galleria Diana in Mexico City and was met with immediate success, followed with another acclaimed show, establishing herself as a leading figure in Mexican Surrealism. And although she did not identify as a feminist herself, her work has since been recognized for its subversion of patriarchal narratives and its portrayal of women as independent seekers of knowledge and power. And she does paint women a lot, so it is a little bit funny that she didn't consider herself a feminist. She died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 54, so much younger, in 1963. Despite her short career, her influence endures. There's a lot of like retrospectives in Mexico and abroad that have solidified her reputation as one of the most important surrealist painters of the 20th century. And so her themes were women as creators, scholars, and magicians, not muses, showing women as active participants. Her collaboration with Carrington was intellectual and spiritual. They would cook magical meals, study mysticism, and invent imaginary worlds. And her imagery transformed scientific inquiry into esoteric ritual. So she would depict witch scientists creating universes in a lot of her paintings. And lastly, we have Kati Horna, who was born in Budapest, which was then a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to an upper-class Jewish family. Growing up during the political and economic instability that followed World War I, she witnessed social upheaval that would shape her lifelong commitment to anti-fascism and social justice. Her father passed away and left the family in financial difficulty, and so she ended up turning to photography as a means of support and political expression. As a teenager, she lived in Berlin, where she was exposed to Marxist theory and avant-garde art, and studied under constructivist artists Lajos Kossak, and then influenced by Bauhaus and Surrealist ideas. Under the mentorship of Marxist theorist Karl Korsch, she came to view photography as a tool for social change. At age 20, she apprenticed under a Hungarian photographer, Pesci, mastering the fundamentals of the medium and forming a lifelong relationship with fellow student Robert Capa. And when Capa became known for his warfront photography, she focused her lens on civilians, particularly women and children, capturing the resilience in the face of violence. They moved to Paris in 1933, where she photographed street life, cafes, and flea markets, developing a narrative humanistic approach that combined documentary realism with surreal sensibility. And then the Spanish Civil War broke out, and she moved to Spain to work for the Republican government and the anarchist organizations CNT and FAI. She documented the war and everyday life of those affected by it, like mothers, children, workers, emphasizing the human cost of conflict. Her work was published in anarchist journals, presented a compassionate yet unflinching view of the war. And during this time, she also met a sculptor, Jose Horna, who she would later marry. After the Republican defeat in 1939, they fled to Paris, where she briefly worked as a photojournalist for Lutier Press.
Cool.
When Nazi forces occupied France, they escaped Mexico, joining a community of European artists and intellectuals in exile, including Remedios Varo, Leonora Carrington, Benjamin Pérez, and Chicky Weiss. They quickly found Mexico to be a new home, saying she felt patriotic only toward that country, which is fun. After living in so many places her whole life, she only felt patriotic towards Mexico. She built a successful career as a photographer and photo editor there while maintaining her surrealist and politically conscious vision, and contributed to multiple publications, serving as the chief photo editor of a magazine in 1958. Her photography during this period blended documentary work with surrealism, and also she worked extensively in architectural photography, documenting Mexico's urban transformation. Some of her works include Ode to Necrophilia, which shows a woman embracing a skeleton. It's very, very a Nosferatu, if I say so.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Women with a Bird Cage, and The Blind Woman. She became an influential teacher, serving on the faculty of the Academy of San Carlos, and remained close friends with Varo and Carrington, sharing their interest in mysticism, the occult, and psychological exploration. Kati Horna died in Mexico in October 2000 at the age of 88. And her rediscovered photographs from the Spanish Civil War, found decades later in forgotten crates in Amsterdam, have since been recognized as invaluable records of civilian life during wartime. Which, how long were those there? It's like all these photographs from the Spanish Civil War in forgotten crates in Amsterdam, and they open them and they're like, oh.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much art is just hidden away and documentation of things.
But they're like, oh, now we have these records of civilian life during the war.
Wow.
She was the documentarian of the trio, and also covered a lot of themes of displacement, motherhood, identity, and dream logic through photography. So she would freeze uncanny moments, show haunted domestic scenes, and turn her photography into an instrument of divination. Okay, so that is the Surrealism Sisterhood. And so we have these three European women artists in exile, Remedios Varo, Leonora Carrington, and Kati Horna. And they become known as the Three Witches of Surrealism. It was popularized later by curators and critics, but it both showed their fascination with mystical and their resistance to the male-dominated structures of European surrealism, which is very witchy of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. The trio became known as the Three Witches, according to Smithsonian Magazine, for their exploration of the supernatural and the metaphysical, which ranged from tarot readings to shamanic psychedelics to attempts to stop or slow time. Living near one another in Mexico City's colonial Roma neighborhood, they gathered regularly to share ideas, texts, and techniques, weaving together a network of friendship and artistic experimentation. They found kinship in exile, mixing the domestic and the divine, turning their studios into laboratories for spiritual inquiry, science, and art. And they often met gathering in Varo's kitchen, where they explored spiritual practices such as Kabbalah, alchemy, tarot. They drank strange concoctions of chestnut water and asparagus juice, which sounds disgusting.
Yeah, I'm like, that doesn't seem appetizing, but
it does sound very witchy.
Yes.
And in this cooperative space, their notebooks brimmed with captivating spells like how to dream you are the king of England, how to provoke erotic dreams. These spells called for strange combinations of ingredients from fresh thyme and incense to the hair from two women, saliva and ash.
They are witches.
Yeah.
Yes.
One striking thing these magical teachings revealed to Varo and her friends was the belief that women had initially possessed powers. Here's a quote from Carrington saying, "Most of us, I hope, are now aware that women should not have to demand rights. The rights were there from the beginning. They must be taken back, including the mysteries which were ours and which were violated, stolen, or destroyed." I love that quote.
I like that too.
Mm-hmm. This became a repeated theme in their work of the initiative to recover powers that women once held. Using goddess-like imagery, the trio depicted women as powerful beings who could create life, wield magic, and deceive men. In comparison to their male counterparts who reduced women to muses or symbols, Varo, Carrington, and Horna made women the active subjects of their mystical landscapes. In each of their dreamscapes, women were the protagonists, the explorers, the scientists, and the creators. These themes reflected their own feminist beliefs and shared utopian wish for a world where the dishes washed themselves so women had the freedom to dream and create.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. And they worked together a lot in Mexico. They all shared experiences of war, displacement, and repression that then fused into their philosophy that treated creation itself as an act of alchemy. So you have Varo, who's creating intricate paintings, Carrington, who has her mythological visions, and Horna's surreal photographs became visual dialogues across mediums reflecting each other's reoccurring symbols like cats, mirrors, hybrid creatures, and esoteric instruments of transformation. They also did not just have like photographs and paintings. They co-wrote 2 plays using this method of automatic writing that we've talked about before, where you just like
Clint, right?
Yeah, you like put your pen down and just become a vessel for the unknown and write.
Yeah. I feel like that continues today with the morning pages that's talked in the book, The Artist's Way. I feel like it's very synonymous with that automatic writing because the whole idea is like you're opening up and welcoming the muse within you before your day even starts and just letting whatever in your brain come out. I don't know. I just think it's so cool to see those similarities and be like, you know what? There must be some truth to this as a creative practice because in any type of creative person seems to have these like overlapping exercises.
And having it exist for so long too, where it's been like a part of creative practice for such a long time.
Seems like the thing to do.
So they co-wrote 2 plays using that. And then Horna photographed Varo wearing her own handmade masks. Together they attended lectures on mysticism and psychology. They mocked the more performative spiritual seekers, which is funny, but drew from those ideas and used it to not just have blind devotion, but to understand the invisible structures of the world, as they put it. Varo also would have like unique creative practices. She would inlay mother of pearl into her canvases, made tiny scratches with quartz crystals she charged by moonlight, a very common practice now for modern witches, and then surrounded her studio with talismans, practices that blurred art making and ritual. They approached surrealism as a discipline of inquiry rather than chaos. Their witchcraft then was not fantasy but philosophy, a framework for seeing beyond rational order. And the witch's label at times was used playfully. It was to show the tension between empowerment and othering that women artists face in surrealism. Like you think of it, you've got these 3 women doing like weird art and weird stuff in this little village in Mexico. Totally. So everyone's, oh yeah, those are the 3 witches. Like those, but also like showing that exclusion that they used into creative power, transforming the witch from a symbol of persecution into one of knowledge, resilience, and feminine sovereignty. Like that they were able to do with the label that they had and like the trio that they created was witchy.
I think that ties back to our episode from last week of just like how the witch has transformed and like what it represents from the 15 and 1600s to now, where you said it's like a reclamation of that word. And it's cool to see that like actually being materialized here with these 3.
Yeah, I really think they claimed it and allowed it to become a part of their own practices. They forged this new kind of surrealism that was grounded in collaboration, science, spirituality, and women's shared inner worlds. A reviewer of a Chicago exhibition summarized, their friendship was itself an act of magic, a rebellion against isolation, and a testament to how imagination could be both a sanctuary and a spell. Carrington's own son once claimed that she was not a witch in the literal sense, but a witch that is there to be found and that discovers something within one, saying she was interested in witchcraft, the kind of witchcraft my mother was doing continuously. Carrington herself declared, "I warn you, I refuse to be an object," staking her claim as an active, self-willed visionary and not a passive muse. Meanwhile, Varo was very openly intertwined with occult practice. She and Carrington, alongside Horna, were often described as the three witches bound together by their shared interests in alchemy, tarot, and cosmology. And critics observed that if you look at Varo's canvases, you'll find pentagrams, witch hat forms, and symbolic juxtapositions of the mystical and material, signs that her art was an enacted magic. As for Horna, she too was folded in the witchist mythology. Her portraits in everyday domestic and natural settings echo early modern depictions of witches, transforming kitchens, gardens, and private rooms into sites of occult agency. In short, what began as a label, which, often dismissive, has become a power by which these three women rewrote forms of authority, mystery, and feminine knowledge.
Wow.
I also think it was fun that, like, Horna focused a lot on the domestic spaces, and that's something we talked about a little bit in our witch episode. But, like, how funny is it that symbols that became so accustomed to be intertwined with, like, witchcraft is, like, a broom, like a domestic cleaning tool, or a cauldron, a domestic cooking tool, or a cat, a domestic pet. And then it becomes these symbols of this otherworldliness, like witchiness. And so she was doing the same with, like, kitchens and bedrooms and, like, areas that are so domestic and yet turning them into these, like, otherworldly spaces.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I think it's interesting how those symbols changed over time.
So yeah, that's the three witches. There's not a ton about them other than what we have, a little bit about their lives, and then their practices that they did together that made them so witchy. And the debate, it's funny, her son saying they weren't really witches, but then they're, like, charging things with moonlight and drinking asparagus juice and chanting spells.
It depends on maybe what your own personal definition of a witch is, but I think by a lot of definitions they are, and that's awesome. That's great. It's also just so crazy to learn about people who died this century who, like, were in Europe during World War II and had to flee. I
know.
Kind of talking about what we did at the beginning of the episode with we're not that far away from history. Like, it's just crazy to be like, oh, they had to flee Europe. They were fugitives of World War II. And that was all pretty recent as far as history goes. And so it's, all three of them have insane stories and lives that led them to where the three of them met. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Technology, I think, makes us feel like we're so much farther removed from history than we actually are. Like, it's, I think that's harder, a great point. For us to imagine being in that time period when in reality that wasn't that long ago.
Like, it wasn't. I also, oh my gosh, all my references are coming from TikTok this week, but I saw a funny TikTok from someone talking about the fact that, like, my phone died and I had to drive home from the airport, so I just used street signs. And you guys, the street signs tell you where to go. And then they made a point of, it's a good reminder that the world did work before the internet. There were systems that worked. People could get around and function in society. Like, we didn't become saved by this technology. Sure, a lot of things became a lot more convenient. Like, a lot of great things have happened because of the internet and things like that. But that's like recent memory. Like, in the last 25 years, when we didn't all have the internet on our phones at all times, like, the world worked. Like, everything, there was a way to do it. And it was a good reminder of, for a long time.
It worked well, too. Like, it functioned perfectly fine for a really long time.
Like, the street signs, they worked. And that has centuries of working without the internet. We've had the internet for 40 years.
People used to navigate boats with the stars. Like, we were figuring it out way before they ever had a GPS.
Exactly. So anyways, it goes along with your point of technology, I think, makes us think that we're a lot more farther removed from history than we actually are. But in reality, this is very new technology, and it wasn't that long ago, actually.
Nope. I think it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind too, and be like, oh, these rights that we have, like the things that we've established,
Mm-hmm.
are not that concrete.
Yeah, and even like our country's pretty
Yeah.
young too in the
Mm-hmm.
span of the world. Like
Like it really
250
hasn't been
years.
around that long.
Pretty
Yeah,
young.
very
Yeah,
young. So
very interesting.
good
Well, wow.
reminders.
Thank you for bringing 3 more incredible women into the More Than a Muse world. And
Yes.
yeah, love their witchiness.
I know, right? So fun. Just like this
Mhm.
trio of women doing their own thing in Mexico and everyone just looking at them like, okay.
Absolutely. I'm
It's a
obsessed.
fun thing.
A friendly reminder, we do have our Halloween Myths of Madness merch available in the light and dark colors. They're under 2 different listings. So,
Yeah.
be conscious of the one that you're choosing. I'm wearing our lighter colors today. Wore our
And we had
dark
our
color
dark
in
ones on
Salem.
last week.
Very fitting.
Yes. So definitely check those out. And then, of course, we're on Instagram and TikTok. Come and follow. We're also on YouTube. If you're watching, hello. Thanks for being here. Please
Yes.
subscribe and comment, all of those things. That helps us out so much. And rate and review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you next week
See you
for
next
our
week.
final Halloween episode. Crazy how
Wow.
fast October went. Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.